All right. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your host, Russell Martin and Brent Aiken. Listen, we're glad you're joining us today, and we hope that you find this conversation helpful, insightful, and encouraging as you continue leading your students in ministry. We want to take a chance and remind you, check us out on social media at Talk Student Men, and also check out our website, studentministryconversations.org. Today, we're going to hear a great conversation that Brent had with Jessica Geiger. And Jessica is a youth and worship pastor at Life Church, Cullman in Hanceville, Alabama. And they're going to sit down and talk about how to equip students that feel a call into ministry. So Brent, can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so today I sit down with Jessica Geiger, and she is going to talk with me about how we can do our best at equipping students that are called into ministry for the future that they have in ministry. And it's an exciting conversation. We had a blast. Really looking forward to you guys hearing it for all the tips and tricks. Check it out.
All right. Well, that does sound great, and I am looking forward to this conversation, and I hope you are as well. So without any further waiting or delay, here's Brent's conversation with Jessica Geiger.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Brent Aiken, and today I'm sitting down with Jessica Geiger, and Jessica is a youth pastor. She is the youth pastor at Life Church, Cullman. But I'm not going to go into too much detail on Jessica. I'm going to let her tell us about herself. So you can tell us whatever you want to include in that. But tell us a little bit about you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast today. I'm so excited. This is actually my first podcast to be on. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Like you said, my name is Jessica Geiger. I have been a youth pastor for 3 years now. I started right as I got out of high school. I started being a youth pastor when I was 18 years old. And I want to give a quick shout out to my students, Forward Youth. You guys are awesome. I know they're going to be listening to this. So what's up, guys? I've been a youth pastor for 3 years. I also am a licensed minister with the Assemblies of God. And fun fact, I actually will be graduating with my bachelor's degree tomorrow. And my bachelor's is in behavioral science. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations from us. That's a big deal.
Thank you.
Okay. So, yeah. And we, of course, had, if you've been on TikTok, obviously, like if you're a youth pastor and you're on TikTok, the algorithms or however that works.
Right.
You've probably seen, or you might have seen, Jessica as one of the youth pastors on TikTok. Me and Russell have actually both seen videos of hers. And that's how we came in contact with her. We were both just like, she'd be a lot of fun to have on the show. And so we decided to extend the invitation, and she was gracious enough to accept it. And as always, we kind of talk about like, hey, what would you be passionate about talking about? And the topic today is how to engage and equip our students that are called into ministry. And that is not a topic that we've hit on before. So I think that's a super important and interesting topic at the same time to talk about. And so I'm very excited. And so we as youth, children, adult pastors, it really doesn't matter. It's all across the spectrum. We've all been through hopefully being recognized at some point for our call to ministry. And we have been mentored by people around us. But what is the significance of the youth pastor taking the time in ministry to recognize students that are called into ministry?
Right. So I think that youth pastors can make a huge impact in a student's life. And that impact can be good or bad. So when a student comes to me, and I've had a couple students now that have expressed interest in going into ministry or told me they feel like God is calling them to be a worship pastor or a youth pastor. My greatest challenge is I want to make sure that I'm equipping them and that I'm encouraging them. I think sometimes, adults or youth pastors or any pastor at all, really, sometimes unintentionally, maybe we can come across a little discouraging to the students, like, well, you're so young, you don't actually know that you're called, or, well, did God actually audibly tell you that you're called to the ministry? And so I think our biggest role and what's so important about what we do is we need to encourage them and lift them up and rejoice with them, because they are the future of the church. And we need to take joy in knowing that there are some young people that are feeling the call to ministry and that are wanting to take the next steps to make that happen.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And as I started youth ministry pretty close to when you did. I think I was probably 20 when I started. And I've been in it for 11 years now, but my youth pastor was pivotal. I mean, he was the person that really kind of put me into motion as far as doing this as a profession. I accepted a call into ministry between 7th and 8th grade, which, like you just said, most of those people would be like, oh no, like, you're too young. You still have 4 years of high school. You have 8th grade. Like, I mean, 5 years, and then you need to go to college. Like, you're way too young. And so, no, he actually was like, all right, that's awesome. And he gave me some different things that I could do. And then it turned out, it actually served as a better purpose. But my youth pastor left when I was a sophomore. And so I ran the youth program with a couple other friends of mine for the next year when they were searching. And we all know how youth pastor searches go. Sometimes it's like 2 weeks and sometimes it's 2 years. You never know.
Yeah.
But so we had the opportunity to run the ministry. And then he was also the person that I was completely doing, just a college job. I was working at Office Max while I was in college. And he was like, hey, like, this church just opened up. They have a youth ministry position that they're looking to fill. He's like, this is the church that I started at. Like, this would be a great fit for you. And so that's super, super important. But like you said, recognizing that specific detail of like, hey, I'm going to encourage you. Mm-hmm. And not only am I going to encourage you, I'm not going to belittle the fact that you might be called into ministry. And so that's super, super important. I totally agree. How can we effectively reach out to students in our ministry that maybe haven't accepted the call, or at least haven't started making progress towards that call? Right.
Yeah. So I took my students to youth camp this summer, and it changed their life. They had never been to youth camp before. And they were like mind blown. They were like, there's all these other students here. It was just crazy. They loved it. And I actually have a little bit of a younger dynamic in my youth ministry. I have all middle school and like some freshmen. So my youth ministry is very young right now, it's a pretty cool thing. I really enjoy the middle school age. They're a lot more fun in my mind. Like, they're down to do whatever. Like, if I was like, we're going to a dump today, they were like, yes, it's gonna be awesome. So they're the best. But I had one student in particular, and I just could see this anointing on her. And I could see that the calling of God on her life was so evident. Like, I could see all these things and characteristics and passions and her talents. And like, it just made so much sense to me. Well, at the time, she was like, I think in 6th grade. And I would tell her all the time, I'm like, you're going to be the world's best youth pastor. I would tell her that. And she would just kind of laugh and roll her eyes and, shrug that off like, oh, whatever. And we get to youth camp this summer, and she's just weeping. I mean, sobbing at the altar call. And she comes up to me and she goes, dang it. And I was like, what? And she goes, I'm called to be a youth pastor. And I was like, it was cool, because it was kind of a full circle moment where, I had seen this in her. And even though she was telling me, no, I don't want it, I don't want to do that, I was still encouraging her and calling things out of her that she couldn't see in herself yet. And I think that as a youth pastor, if you see a gift, if you see a talent, if you see something that your student is particularly good at, encourage them to develop and grow in those gifts and those talents and in those abilities. And they're going to go through moments where they don't really see those qualities or those strengths in themselves because they're in the 6th grade or they're in the 9th grade. But you, as the youth pastor, can use spiritual discernment and say, you know what, I'm not going to give up on this student, because if you really believe that that child is called, you need to do everything in your power to best equip them and to set them on the path to believe in themselves to fulfill that calling.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I mean, it's always really, really cool to have those students. And this kind of branches me off into two questions. And so we'll first start off with, you talked about like taking your kids to camp and how that was like the catalyst moment that it was just like, oh, shoot, like you're right.
Right.
But would you go into detail for a second and explain just like the importance of going to camp or going to retreats and how that is that catalyst moment?
Yes. So youth camp, I grew up going to youth camp when I was in youth ministry. And I can say from personal experience as the student, youth camp changed my life. Like that was my best week of summer. There's just an energy and a passion about youth camp. A few of my students were a little fired up because we don't have a lot of boys in our youth group right now. So they started getting around all these other boys at youth camp and they were fired up and passionate. Not just for the Lord in that moment, but it's so fun and it's cool because they get to make connections with students from all over the state. Ours is a statewide youth camp. And so they get to be encouraged in knowing like, wow, I'm not the only one that's on fire for the Lord. Like they get to see other youth ministries and other youth pastors. And so it's really cool for them to get to go and make new friends from all over the state and from different churches and backgrounds. And youth camp it's something, if you haven't experienced it, it's hard to describe, but if you've been before or if you've gone as a youth pastor, it's like the best week of the year, in my opinion. So.
No, I totally agree. And that's why I brought up that conversation. That question is for the sake of, there is significant power in church camp. I am a firm believer in church camp. I actually direct one camp and I direct a retreat as well out at the campground that we go to. And like, those are really, really impactful moments. And those are the moments where I really, there's something magical about taking a student out of their home life. And surrounding them with like-minded people. And of course, there's stuff that happens at camp. There's still pranks and everything that happens. And there's still bad decisions that are made. But for the grand scheme of things, like taking them out of their home context with all the problems that they have in their world at the time and surrounding themselves with people that are loving and encouraging and uplifting. And it's life-changing. Like you said, there's not a better word for it, but the significance of that allows God to kind of speak through clearly. And that's why that catalyst is there, is because they're actually open and listening. Right. And so it's super, super important to have that moment. And then this kind of takes that question and leads into the second question I had. So we know the power of camp, and we know that the power of camp is that catalyst moment. How do we take the rest of the time? Like you said, you have a younger group. How do you walk through the rest of that time frame that your kids have when they have received the call to ministry that early? Do you have like any specific tips or tricks or things that you start implementing, maybe leadership roles or something to that nature? How do you take that sixth grader that said, hey, I want to be a youth pastor? How do you start and use the rest of the time you have with them to continue to build upon them?
Right. I think that's a great question. So I'll kind of take this back. For me personally, I felt called into ministry when I was like 6 years old. I have felt called my entire life. And I went to a church called Calvary Assembly, and it changed my life. That whole church did. And we were talking earlier about, how you said that you had a youth pastor that really impacted you. And my youth pastor, Pastor Josh, made all the difference in who I am today. Like I would not be the youth pastor I am today if I had never met him. And I think the number one thing that he did was, first of all, I expressed to him, I feel called to ministry. At the time, I had no idea it would be youth ministry. Like I had no desire at that point to be a youth pastor. But, sometimes God just opens doors and anoints us and equips us for certain seasons that we never thought we would be in. But I had expressed to him, I feel called to ministry. But not only did I tell him that, like he recognized it in me and he believed in me. And so what was so life-changing about our dynamic that me and that youth pastor had was he like mentored me and poured into my life. And it wasn't like he was only involved with me during youth services. And then after that, it was like, okay, see you next week. He was a major role in my life. Like if I had a volleyball game, he was going to be at that game. If I had a theater performance, he showed up to that. And I think those little things like that, it communicates to the student, I believe in you. I'm here for you. I want to do life locking arms with you. And I'm on your team. Like I want to be your friend. And so with my students that feel called to ministry, or, are those young students that I know I'm going to have for these next few years, I want to be like their go-to. I want to be someone that they know they can count on. And I want to earn some trust with them, because if I tell them, hey, you know what, you can do anything you set your mind to, they'll believe me if they trust me. And so it's just so huge, and it's vital for us to really be a part of their life, get involved in their life, learn about their friends, learn about their hobbies, go to their schools. And I think the next thing is give them opportunities to minister in the youth group. I actually have a student who's our worship leader right now for our youth ministry, and I let her do the whole thing. Like she's got it, and she does a great job. Is she perfect? No, not by no means is she perfect, but are any of us? No. So this is like kind of a training ground for her to grow in her gifts. And also when you lead worship for a youth group, it's a very forgiving audience because, they don't have any idea what it should be like. So she's getting all this experience. She's getting comfortable singing on stage, and she's practicing with a team. She's learning about all those things. And so I think as the youth pastor, we have the power and the authority to hand the mic over to someone else. And so it's just making sure, are we willing to share the microphone with a student? Are we willing to say, you know what, I'm going to prioritize my students getting the chance to grow in their gifts and walk out their calling. And if my student feels called to preach, I'm going to say, hey, do a 5-minute sermon next Wednesday, share your testimony. So I think that is huge, giving them opportunities to use their gifts and their callings in the youth group.
Yeah, no, what are we there for other than that? Like we're supposed to be equipping and encouraging, and that's one of the best ways we can do it. There's so many different ways you can go about doing that. And you talked about like how the youth pastor was a part of your life. And I don't know if you've read the book Love Does by Bob Goff.
Yes, I have.
But I absolutely love the chapter that he talks about like how he's just going to run off, and like the youth pastor is just like, all right, cool, I'll go with you.
Right.
And so like, long story short, if you haven't read the book, for anybody that's listening, he has no idea. He just wants to go up and live in the mountains. Bob does. And the youth pastor's like, do you have a plan? And he's like, no, I'm just going to get a job when I get up there. I'll backpack and camp and all this stuff. And he's like, I'm going to go with you. Mm-hmm. And so long story short, they spend like a week up in the mountains trying to get Bob a job and like trying to find him a place to stay and everything like that. It fails miserably. And so they come back. And then when he gets back, he realizes that his youth pastor had just gotten married and they were just getting back from their honeymoon. And the youth pastor dropped everything and went with him on a week stint up in the mountains just to make sure he was okay. And so super, super cool. But like, I'm not saying that every youth pastor needs to go like abandon their life and go spend a week in the mountains. I mean, as lovely as that would be, but I'm saying like, that's the part of the life, being a part of their life. Like you just mentioned, like if we are not engaged in who they are and what they're doing, they're going to find someone else who is. And unfortunately in the world that we live in, there's a lot more negative influences than there are positive influences. So that's awesome. Great questions. For the students that have, and we kind of talked about this, how else would you go about if like, say the 6th grader that's accepted a call to ministry, how do we encourage and mentor them during the call to ministry? Or would you specifically appoint, would you appoint leaders to go over them directly? Or do you go kind of like, I'm going to mentor this student? Because I've seen it done both ways. I've seen different youth pastors that will be like, hey, I have these volunteers that are retired ministers or maybe they did a stint in youth ministry, or maybe they have no ministry experience. They're just really on fire for the Lord.
Right.
And they're like, hey, your job is to just foster this relationship. And so do y'all, as far as your doing of this, do you have specific people in your group that you trust, or do you kind of handle that fostering situation as far as building them up? How does that work? Right.
So for me, particularly right now with the season we're in, if I have a student that is feeling called to the ministry, it's mostly me that's pouring into their life and helping equip them and give them the resources. However, I will say this, I think youth leaders are also just as important as a youth pastor. Like, youth service could not get done without those youth leaders and those youth sponsors. And the youth pastor cannot do everything. It is not possible for the youth pastor to open worship, lead the worship, transition, do offering, do announcements, preach. I mean, it can be done, but it's not ideal. And those youth leaders can make all the difference. I trust every youth leader I have. I trust them to pour into my students' lives. I trust them to encourage my students. And there are going to be sometimes I can't go to 2 sports events at once. And sometimes there are conflicting sports games. And so we got to divide and conquer. And I'm going to go over here, and some youth leaders are going that way. And I think if you have a youth leader or you have youth leaders that you trust and that you feel like are on fire for the Lord, like you had said, or if you feel like they are passionate about seeing this next generation fulfill the call of God, 100%, yes, trust them. Let them pour into the students' lives. They don't want to just help in youth service to stack chairs. Like, they want to also be a part of the students' lives. They want to make an impact on them as well. If they just wanted to serve and clean, they'd become the church janitor. Like, they're in the youth ministry to help the youth and to make an impact on them. So if you trust your youth leaders, if they have spiritual maturity and wisdom, 100%, let them pour into your students as well. Let them encourage and text and hang out with your students. And I'll say this too, if I've never had this happen yet, but I'm sure it will at some point, I may have a student someday come to me and say, I feel called into the media ministry, and running sound. I'm not a sound person. I don't run the soundboard. So at that point, like, I would want to find someone else to disciple them, because I can't teach them what they need to be learning. And so if you have a student come to you and there's like a different dynamic, or if they're saying, I feel called to dance for the Lord, and you're like, I couldn't dance to save my life, right? Like, I also could not do that one. I'm just saying, if you have things and your students have gifts and talents that are kind of beyond your realm of what you do, 100%, that is a great time to say, you know what, I'm going to plug you in with Susie, and she is going to help you become the best worship dancer ever, So I think it's important to have a good mix of both.
Yeah. And I totally agree. Going back to one thing you said about youth leaders are not there just to stack chairs. That could be an episode by itself.
Yes.
Holy cow. If you are not giving your youth volunteers something to do other than stand in the background and be there as a warm body, don't expect them to be there long, because they're going to find fulfillment and they're going to find their mission somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But that's, like I said, that is an hour of content for a completely different podcast. And so the other thing I was going to say is with, obviously this is kind of a controversial subject, and I don't really want to go into too much detail as far as the controversy, but obviously there are different opportunities and there are different church beliefs when it comes to leadership and ministry and gender roles and all that fun stuff. We personally, I come from the Methodist church background. We are all for women in ministry. And in fact, I've served under a female pastor, and she was one of my favorites. She was like a grandma. But it was like, what is the importance of not just like, I guess, not belittling either side? How do you go about making sure that that's a group focus, and whether it's a sixth grade girl that wants to be in ministry or a sixth grade boy. I mean, obviously, let's take that two ways. First off, what's the importance of just encouraging and fostering for both sides? And then there might be even more conversation of, is there a different path that you would take to foster a sixth grade girl that has a call into ministry over a sixth grade boy that has a call into ministry?
Right. So as a whole with the group, including both sides, they both need encouragement. They both need discipleship. Both sides need to know and trust and understand that you as the youth pastor or you as the youth leader believe in that child, believe in the calling that's on their life, and that you are going to do everything in your power to equip them, to encourage them. And I think for most students, ministry is not the popular choice of career. Like when they go to their school setting and they're like, yeah, when I graduate high school, I'm going to go be a youth pastor. That's not a very common career mention, from seniors. And so it's not like they're making the most popular choice with their future and their career. It's not like, it's the most glamorous job. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go be in ministry and we all know I'm going to be a multimillionaire doing that. Like, that's not the case. And so sometimes I think that there's just, for both sides, both genders, there's a little bit of negativity with going into ministry. There is not as much support and encouragement. My whole life, I've had people discourage me from going into ministry, not because of my gender, but because they were like, okay, like, how are you going to make a living? Like, what are you going to do for money? And it was people that didn't understand, like, you really can do this as a career. And so there is discouragement for both genders. Now, to branch out with that second part question you would ask about, are there things you need to do more for one gender than the other? I do think that women in ministry do face an extra layer of criticism, an extra layer of people bashing and tearing down and saying, you can't do this. I know just from my TikToks, which I promise it doesn't hurt my feelings when I get these comments. I'm used to it. I've gotten it my whole life. But if I post a TikTok of me joking about taking my students to the skate rink, I will get hateful comments like, you're ruining your students because you're a female youth pastor, or who do you think you are to be a female and preach? And, I get those comments on any video I do. All women, or most, but I would venture to say at some point, all women in ministry, they get criticism for being a female, fulfilling the call of God in their life. And there comes a point, and what I teach my girl students that say they want to be a youth pastor, I tell them, look, there are going to be people out there that are ignorant and that are going to tell you, you cannot fulfill the call in your life because you're a female. And I'm going to tell you otherwise because I'm a female and I'm doing it. So yes, you can. And I think that we just, as youth pastors and youth leaders, really go that extra mile with your girl students, because they're going to get comments and hatred and comments from peers at school. Like, there are going to be girls and guys at school that say, well, you can't do that. Their teachers will say it. Their grandparents will say it. There are going to be people their whole life that say they can't do it because of their gender. And if you believe they can, show them you believe they can. Give them the opportunities to do it. And if you're like a guy youth pastor, if you're a male youth pastor out there, for me, it's different because I am a female. When I pour into my students and say, hey, you can do this, especially my female students, it goes the extra mile because it's coming from a female youth pastor. If you're a male youth pastor out there, find a strong woman in ministry and say, hey, look at them. They are successful. They are doing it. And if it's possible, link them up together so that older female can pour into that student and say, yes, you can do this. This is the adversity I have faced. This is common comments I have gotten and received. And this is how you overcome it. So I think that is very important.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, it's something that I've always tried to do. And to the point to where I've been at my current church for 4.5 years almost. And I've had 3 associate youth pastors since I've been here. 2 of them have been female because, quite honestly, we work better together. Right. Having both sides, having the opportunity to have that different opinion, like we're a well-oiled machine because we work in very different ways, and that's totally fine. I find incredible value in the side of having women in ministry, but also to the nature of, I was always, I guess I grew up with not having that. And so I've mentioned this in previous podcasts before, but the book that I kind of go back to time and time again is Well-Intentioned Dragons. And so basically this, it's an old book, but it talks about how like there's a bunch of people in the church that think that they're well-intentioned and they think that they're trying to help by spurting out all this information and like saying, well, hey, you can't fulfill God's calling because you're a woman and the Bible says no. And it's like, well, no, that's what you believe. That's what you heard. That's what you were told by someone else. But in all reality, like, show me. Right. And so, but I think you're spot on. I think it's difficult for women. And I really don't think I understood that until my first youth ministry job, because that was when I worked under my female pastor. And she came in about halfway through my duration there. And no kidding, we had a family leave the church because his thing was, I can't be at a church with a female pastor. And I hadn't really ever dealt with that before. And it was just one of those holy cow moments. Yeah. And so it is a difficult decision, and I don't want to harp on that for the whole thing, but I do think it's important because like we need to be encouraging both sides. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think there's very different ways that we encourage both. And I would say from the female pastor's perspective, if you are ministering and you're equipping and encouraging a 6th-grade boy, I would say the same thing. You need to find a male that you can push and say, hey, they're awesome. You need to go speak with them, because there's also the thing that we have to deal with in the lovely world that we live in called boundaries. Because one false accusation, one anything, and your job is gone, and not only gone, your career is over. Yeah. And so finding that leader preemptively is probably a very good plan. And I would start that right off the get-go. So if you're new and you're listening to this, you need to find that leader. You need to find the leader. If you're a male youth pastor, you need to find that female leader that will be there for those mentorship moments. And likewise for girls. If you're a woman in ministry, you need to find that guy. And hopefully you have leaders already plugged into your group that were willing and engaged to do that. But super, super important. Don't put yourself in a pickle trying to be that super encouraging and empowering person, because it can also get you in trouble. Right. And so outside of this conversation, we've had a great topic as far as everything else. The only other thing I can think of that would be kind of to throw this in is, you obviously talked about leadership and like giving those ministry students an opportunity to get plugged into different leadership opportunities, whether it be worship leading, whether it be leading a sermon. We at our church do, we just started it last year. But a lot of churches do it called Youth Sundays, where like the youth leads a service. Mm-hmm. Give them opportunities to do stuff like that. But outside of the conversation, do you have any resources? Do you have any other ideas or tidbits that you want to throw out there that we did not discuss?
So I know in our denomination, and like I said, currently I am affiliated with the Assemblies of God denomination, and we have something called Fine Arts Competition. And I 100% support fine arts and everything it stands for. They have categories that students can compete in, from short sermons to vocal solos. They even have like a puppetry category. So if you're into like doing the puppets for children's church, you can compete in that event. And they start out, it's like a state fine arts competition, and then it goes to the national level. And if you pass state, you get to go to nationals. It's really cool. And my students love it. And I actually was coaching a fine arts drama team when I was in like the 12th grade. I coached the team that I was on, which was not a very easy task to coach the drama that you're in. But it was fun. But we would do these competitions, and I remember there's just so much energy and enthusiasm behind it. And what's so powerful about it is with our youth group that I was in, when we would go and watch someone do their sermon, we weren't viewing them as our competitor. We were viewing them as they did a great job. I'm so proud of them. You know, they did so much better this year than last year. And so fine arts is really good for like youth group team bonding and building with your students, but it also gives them that chance to do what they feel called to do. And like I said, I mean, they have like drum categories and dancing categories. I mean, literally anything you could possibly think of a student doing at church, this competition has. And I know that there's other denominations that have like teen talent. There's different things like it that aren't exactly fine arts, but they're similar, because the idea behind it is we want our students to get the chance to grow and develop their gifts. They also receive feedback because they're, like I said, it's a competition. So there are judges, and it's always constructive feedback. Like, hey, you know, next year when you do your sermon, make sure you clearly define your 3 main points or something like that. And it helps them learn how to write a sermon. It helps them learn, okay, maybe I fidget too much when I'm preaching, you know, different things like that. And you can start it in the 6th grade and it goes all the way through 12th grade. So I think that things like that are good resources. So whatever denomination you're in, I would say research, you know, does our denomination have some sort of competition or a fine arts community, you know, like I had mentioned? And if they don't, maybe do something of your own, like have something like that within your own youth group, you know, kind of host your own fine arts, quote unquote, and give your students a service to so-and-so is going to do their dance solo, and then somebody's going to do a sermon. Give them opportunities, because they want to do that. And students love to feel like you believe in them, but they also love the opportunity, and they want to be on the stage. We are like living and leading a generation. Everybody wants to be an influencer right now. All your students love to see pictures of themselves posted on your youth group's page. They want to be a part. They want to be in the video. They want to be on the stage. They want to hold the mic. And that is awesome. So let's encourage them and empower them to use those gifts and talents, but use them for the Lord.
No, I totally agree. And going back to the whole denominational thing, especially if you're Assemblies of God or Methodist Church or Baptist Church, you have tremendous overarching governmental kind of organization over you. Mm-hmm. And so normally those have great resources. I know, for instance, the Methodist Church has a lot of things with bringing people into ministry. They have like classes, they have specific camps, they have all kinds of stuff. So I would contact your organizational office, wherever that may be. Ask your pastor. They might know more than you do. But there's tons of resources out there that you can do. The second thing that I would kind of throw in there is, obviously, we've talked about this a few times, putting them in leadership positions. The other thing I would super encourage you, and this is one of like what you said a second ago, kind of take it into your own hands. Start a high school leadership group or a leadership group, whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be high school. We just specifically in our church, even if we feel students are kind of called into ministry, I'll have those conversations and those interactions with junior high, but all of our leadership is done in high school, just for the sake of it gives the junior high something to look forward to. And so we have opportunities, but we have I say completely led, but it's almost completely led student worship team. I play on it, but other than that, every instrument's filled by a high school student. And then you have those opportunities, and we have students that are leading junior high small groups, all kinds of stuff. But when they step out and use their skill sets and talents and God-given abilities during our normal ministry meeting time, they need a time for them as well.
Right.
And so we do on Sunday afternoons, we do a high school leadership group, and it is less gospel. full Bible based, and it's a lot more like how do you use how do you use the abilities that God's given you? How do you learn to be a leader? How do you learn to be someone that has integrity and all that stuff? And so we use leader treks a ton. And so I'll throw a link into the show notes for where you can find leader treks, but they have some fantastic curriculum. And it's all Bible based. And there's literally like handout sheets that you just print off and have the lesson. And then they also have camps, they have retreats, they have all kinds of stuff. If you're literally trying to build something from scratch, they're a great resource, a great opportunity. And we use leader treks a ton because it's talking about those moments and those opportunities where not only can we empower them and encourage them to be in ministry like they're called, but we want them to be the most efficient and effective leader that they can too. Because we all know that you can be, well, I think we've all met someone in ministry that is a great minister, but not a great leader. Right. And it is super, super important to be a great leader, because ultimately when you are stepping up into any kind of pastoral position, you are leading people. And so if you are not an effective leader, you need to work on getting better at that. The other thing that I do just for my personal leadership, and I've had kids listen to this too, get into some of the podcasts like Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast, Craig Groeschel's Leadership Podcast. Both of those are fantastic. They interview people in and out of the church. I have some kids that like just hardcore listen to podcasts. And so they listen to those. And I mean, Carey Nieuwhof is like, I don't know if there's anybody more efficient as a leader as he is. Really, really good information to have and everything as far as implementing and incorporating leadership into your group. But yeah, so other than that, resources and conversation aside, once again, Jessica, it was awesome having you on the show. How can people connect with you on social media? Of course, we want your TikTok handle. We want your YouTube channel. We want all of your rise to fame so we can all watch you become the next TikTok star.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for having me. I had a great time on the podcast today. So thank you for the opportunity. So my Instagram is at Jessica_Geiger_. My TikTok is Jessica Geiger 13. There's no underscores in that one. YouTube is just Jessica Geiger. And I wanted to say this really fast. This is for all the youth pastors and youth leaders out there. So when I started the YouTube channel, I was like, okay, this is weird. I feel weird doing this, but I don't do anything super, super overly like spiritual on my YouTube channel. What I'm doing is I want to show the students like, hey, you can use your social media and not cuss. You can use your social media and not be partying in your vlog or going crazy. And so I think here's the thing, youth pastors and youth leaders listening, wherever your students are on a social media app, you need to be there too. And they need to see you. And there's things on TikTok that are not very clean and are not very godly, but we need to show them a positive influence on those apps. And even if it's not my students that see it, if it's your students that see it, I want to show a positive, godly example on all social media. So I think it's important for all of us to be on those things. And the last thing I would link is I actually have an evangelism page. So if you would like to reach out to me to come speak to your students or to come lead worship at your church anytime, I have an evangelism website. It is vesselministries.net. And I actually have an email linked on there where you can contact me. And my number is listed on that site as well.
That's awesome. And kind of tagging on to that TikTok comment, the other thing that's super important is if we're on TikTok or especially the video content related socials, right? Because I mean, Instagram, Facebook, like, yes, Snapchat, they're just literally talking with their friends.
Right.
But when you get into TikTok and when you get into YouTube and even Facebook is kind of dealing with it now with Facebook and Instagram Reels, the impact that you have can can also reach into students' lives more when you have channels for them to actually pay attention to.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons I got a TikTok. I got a TikTok. That sounds like an old way to say that. I'm on TikTok. I have a TikTok.
Right.
But that's one of the reasons I got on, is for the sake of, like, I know there's a lot of negativity. I know there's a lot of things on there that are corrupting kids and all that stuff. But I know there's a lot of good content on there too. And so I go and I follow and find people, and then I'll throw like TikTok people, and I'll be like, hey, I'll text my kids and be like, hey, I really think like you would like this person. Right. This person's awesome. Or there's a couple people that I follow that are just like biblical literacy people. And like, they just combat biblical, like people that are like challenging what the Bible says. And they're like, no, like the Greek says this, and like, they'll go through all the details. And so there's a lot of cool stuff on TikTok, just as much as there is negative. And we can be kind of the lightning rod, so to speak, on like channeling which direction our kids go if we give them opportunities and give them, hey, you might like this page. They're wholesome, they're clean, they're super funny. And so that's just a great opportunity there as well. I used to, going on my age, not really, I'm only 31, but going on my age a little bit. The big thing that I used to do before social media was as big of a hit as it is now, was music. I used to do the same thing with music and say, oh, well, if you like Nickelback, because Nickelback was a thing back then. Yeah. If you like Nickelback, you should listen to Skillet. Like if you like, and so it's the same kind of mindset of like, hey, I know you really like this person and I know you like the content they're creating, but what about this person? They're the same person. They're doing the same stuff, except they're clean. Right. Not degrading or downgrading people or anything like that. And you have a great opportunity to, I guess, change the way that they are consuming media. Yeah. So, well, super awesome. Thank you once again for having the time to be on the show with us.
Thank you.
This episode, I believe, if I'm talking my calendar right, is going to come out on December 23rd. So awesome. Merry Christmas, people. Hope y'all all have a great Christmas. We love you guys. And this is our last episode for the calendar year of 2021. And we can't wait to see y'all in 2022. So Jessica, thank you for your time. And for everybody listening to this podcast, we love you guys. Y'all have a great Christmas, and we'll see y'all next year.
Well, hey, everybody. Thanks again for joining us and listening to this podcast, especially if you are listening just right before Christmas. We want to say Merry Christmas to you. Or if you're checking this out afterwards or listening later, we hope that you enjoyed it and you found content that you can use as you continue to pour into the lives of your students.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, we would ask that you leave a comment and a rating on whatever platform you're listening to us on. We would appreciate that so much, as it helps us get out into the podcast world. Also, maybe you know someone who would benefit from this conversation. Take a moment and share this with them on social media, tag them, and then also tag us at Talk Student Men on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Also, you can support us now financially. You can support us monthly by a donation, or you can buy our podcast merch on our website, studentministryconversations.org, and all of the purchases from that, the proceeds go straight back into the podcast. Now, Russell, this episode is releasing at a special time of year. We are 2 days away from Christmas and about a week away from the new year. What do we have coming, and what do we have in store for the podcast?
Yes, our first episode back after the Christmas break is going to be our second recap episode. So we did this back in the fall. We took some clips from our favorite episodes that Brent and I each picked, and we put them together to make kind of a highlight reel of our summer. And so we're going to do the same thing with the fall. We're going to pick some of our favorite episodes, put those together, and tell you what we liked about them and give that to you. So it will be a great chance for you to go back and listen to some of your favorite conversations from this past fall, and also to introduce someone else to the podcast. You can use this as a way to say, hey, here, listen, figure out what you like. and then go listen to those specific conversations throughout the fall. So we're looking forward to it, and we're looking forward to seeing you back then.
That sounds great. Well, guys, we are taking off next week as our break for the Christmas holidays. We will be seeing you back at the start of the new year. The episode will drop on January 6th. And we are excited to see what the new year brings for this podcast. A lot of exciting guests, a lot of awesome opportunities, and we can't wait for us to put out more content for you guys. Just a reminder, be sure to go to studentministryconversations.org for show notes and links from this episode. Just search for this week's episode number in the search bar. We also have other helpful articles and posts on there for you. And again, thank you for joining us. We hope you have a great Christmas, and we look forward to seeing you next year.